Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the National Human Rights Institution's 2020 Conference on the Rights of Older Persons in the run-up to the 11th session of the United Nations General Assembly's Open-Ended Working Group on Aging for the purpose of strengthening the protection of the human rights of older persons. I'm Karen Gomez-Dumpit from the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines, and I am your moderator for this event. The UNGA Open-Ended Working Group was established in 2010 to consider the existing international framework of the human rights of older persons and to identify possible gaps and how best to address them, including by considering as appropriate the feasibility of further instruments and measures. Its mandate was extended in 2012 to consider proposals for an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons. The working group usually holds its sessions once a year at the UN headquarters in New York. Its 11th session, originally scheduled to be held in April 2020, was unfortunately postponed to 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The importance of continuing the discourse on human rights of older persons and how best to protect them in between the official sessions of the UNGA's Open-Ended Working Group is most highlighted by the present context where older persons are among those severely affected by the virus. It is in recognizing this that the organizers bring to you this platform for a diverse set of stakeholders, including governments, civil society, the academe, and NHRIs to come together in preparation for the official session of the Open-Ended Working Group in 2021. So in behalf of the organizers, the UNDESA, GANRI, the Permanent Mission of Argentina to the UN, and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and our host, of course, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, I thank everyone for finding the time to participate in this conference despite the time difference. Before we begin, let me just direct you to a little housekeeping. We direct your attention to the available interpretation at the lower portion of our screen. You can just click the interpretation button and click the appropriate language so that you can better participate in this webinar. So without further ado, may I call on Chairperson Chae Yong-e of the National Human Rights Commission of Korea and the Chair of the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions Working Group on Aging to give her opening remarks.
Good afternoon. I am Young-hae Choi, Chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission of Korea. First of all, I would like to express my full support and encouragement for colleagues who are dedicated to protecting human rights and the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the daily lives of people across the world. It reminds us how precious a cup of coffee enjoyed at a cafe can be. The COVID-19 pandemic is an ongoing public health crisis. In fact, the 11th session of the UNGA Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, originally scheduled for April 2020, had to be postponed to next year due to COVID-19, unfortunately. As person of the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, and also as chair of the GANRI Working Group on Aging, I have always felt a sense of responsibility to lead the efforts in promoting the rights of older persons on behalf of NHRIs worldwide, and especially when the world grapples with the pandemic, as older persons could suffer the most fatal consequences. More so than any other socially vulnerable or marginalized groups, we cannot afford to neglect our duty to protect the rights of older persons. Accordingly, NHRCK, following consultations with the United Nations, many government bodies, international civil society groups, as well as GANRI, has decided to host the conference on the rights of older persons today. Before we begin the conference in earnest, I would like to take a moment to extend my gratitude to the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Permanent Mission of the Argentine Republic to the United Nations in New York, and Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions for co-sponsoring this event. I would also like to thank members of the GANRI Working Group on Aging for their active participation in the working group meetings as well as activities, and also many speakers and participants joining us remotely from all around the world in a virtual format. Thank you very much.
코로나19로 전 세계가 팬데믹인 이와 같은 시기에는 다른 어느 계층보다 노인 계층이 더 취약하다고 볼 수 있습니다.
As the world struggles to
지금도 세계
contain
곳곳에
the COVID-19
노인
pandemic,
요양
even as we speak, at many care facilities for older people around the world, a large number of COVID-19 cases are being reported, and in some cases, their access to adequate medical treatment is being limited or even denied altogether. Older adults should be given priority in treatment and care, yet they're being denied access to such care. This is deeply regrettable indeed. Distinguished participants, the COVID-19 pandemic cannot be tackled by a single society or state alone. All of us need to come together and pool our wisdom and work together across borders to tackle this crisis. Today, we will discuss preparations for the 11th session of the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, normative content for the development of international standards in the areas of education, training, lifelong learning, and capacity building, as well as normative contents in the areas of social protection and social security, and older persons' rights to work and access to labor market and access to justice. I hope we will all have a productive meeting today with tangible results, and I do expect that we will share the outcomes at the 11th session of the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging to be held next year to provide valuable guidance on the protection of the rights of older persons for countries around the world. In closing, I thank all of you for your strong commitment to protecting the rights of older persons again, and I look forward to your continued active participation, support, and solidarity. I wish you and your family good health. Thank you very much.
감사합니다. Chair Wijang Nim. Thank you very much, Chairperson Che. Indeed, as NHRIs, we cannot afford to neglect our duty, especially in the present context of the COVID pandemic. Our next speakers are the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Her Excellency Michelle Bachelet, and the Chair of the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions from Ecuador, Ombudsman Freddy Carrion Intriago, to give their congratulatory remarks.
I am honored to address you today at this important event. I thank the NHRI Working Group on Aging, led by its chair, Ms. Jang-ak Choi, of the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, for convening this discussion. It will contribute to the work for the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, as it develops proposals for international legal instruments on the rights and dignity of older people. The pandemic is giving new urgency to this task. In the past year, it has claimed the lives of almost 1.4 million people. The majority were older people. In this, as we are with other groups disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, the pandemic is exploiting the weakness of our human rights protections. Economic, social, and legal systems have long failed to give sufficient weight to protecting the rights and dignity of older persons, including the rights to health, social protections, and decent housing. Now, given the justified fear of contagion, as well as illness, social isolation, loneliness, poverty, and unemployment, the pandemic has made older people deeply vulnerable. Those living in care homes and institutions are particularly affected. Many national human rights institutions around the world are playing a key role in upholding and protecting the rights of older people during the pandemic. Their advice and technical guidance to national and local authorities and their contributions to awareness raising and capacity building are nourished by focused grassroots monitoring and the investigation of specific complaints regarding the infringement of older people's rights. I commend this work. Together, we need to encourage all states to fully integrate the focus on older people into all policy responses to COVID-19. To achieve this, there need to be more discussions at national level, involving other people themselves. I also encourage increased sharing of good practices and experience, including at the regional and international levels. We also need more evidence and data that are age disaggregated to better understand the specific protection gaps that affect older people and better develop international standards to address them. The Secretary General's policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older people, which was issued in May, has created new momentum for the rights and dignity of older people. 146 member states have endorsed a joint statement expressing commitment to fully promoting and respecting the dignity and rights of older people during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Similarly, 122 civil society organizations and networks around the world sent a joint letter to the Secretary General offering their support. The UN system responded with multiple global and regional initiatives, including development of the Decade of a Healthy Aging 2021-2030. We need to keep strengthening these concerted efforts to advance the protection of older people's rights, and I very much look forward to hearing about your discussions. Thank you.
Distinguidas autoridades y representantes del Sistema de Naciones Unidas, señoras y señores miembros del Grupo de Trabajo de Composición Abierta sobre el Envejecimiento, estimados y estimadas colegas representantes de las instituciones nacionales de derechos humanos de GANR, señores representantes de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, invitados y público en general. Como presidente de la Alianza Global de Instituciones Nacionales de Derechos Humanos, GANRI, tengo el placer de dar la bienvenida a cada uno de ustedes a la Conferencia 2020 de Instituciones Nacionales de Derechos Humanos sobre los derechos de las personas adultas mayores. Esta vez se realizará gracias a la iniciativa del Grupo de Trabajo de GANRI sobre Envejecimiento, que se encuentra acertadamente dirigida por la Comisión Nacional de Derechos Humanos de Corea del Sur, a cargo de la presidenta señora Yoon Ae-chol. Es un honor para mí compartir la mesa con tan distinguidas autoridades como la señora Michelle Bachelet, alta comisionada de Naciones Unidas para los Derechos Humanos, la señora Claudia Mahler, experta independiente sobre el disfrute de los derechos de las personas adultas mayores, el señor Kiran Raveru, presidente de la Alianza Global de Derechos de las Personas Adultas Mayores. El tema que hoy nos convoca es de trascendental importancia para la humanidad, dado que a nivel global el grupo de población mayor de 65 años está creciendo de una forma acelerada frente a los grupos de menor edad. Según las estadísticas de Naciones Unidas, se calcula que para el año 2050 la población mayor de 65 años representará el 16% de la población total, de la población mundial. Claro, comparada con el 9% registrado en el 2019. Además, se calcula que se triplicará la población mayor de 80 años en todo el mundo. La pandemia, por supuesto, visibilizó la vulnerabilidad en la que se encuentran las personas adultas mayores, no solamente en cuanto a la atención de salud, sino también en cuanto a la vulneración a su derecho al trabajo, ya que muchas personas han perdido sus empleos o fuentes de ingresos que les permiten justamente preservar la salud y la vida. La falta de acceso a una vivienda adecuada, a condiciones óptimas en los centros de cuidado, ha significado un mayor riesgo de contagio, pero de muerte sobre todo para las personas adultas mayores. Todos los actores, gobierno, sociedad, organizaciones internacionales y las instituciones nacionales de derechos humanos tenemos un compromiso ineludible con la sociedad actual y futura. Combatir la discriminación y la exclusión que enfrentan las personas mayores en el ámbito privado y en el público en general. Han sido erróneamente considerados como receptores pasivos de cuidados y de asistencia, es decir, se las considera que son una carga para las economías y los sistemas de bienestar social. Eso es donde debemos incidir para cambiar esa realidad. Frente a este escenario es preciso que trabajemos por la población adulta mayor, pero con un enfoque en derechos humanos, reconociendo su dignidad y sus derechos para garantizar su independencia, su participación activa, pero sobre todo la autorrealización en términos de dignidad. Los esfuerzos de la comunidad internacional se están encaminando hacia ese fin. Recordemos, por ejemplo, que el Plan de Acción de Madrid sobre el envejecimiento tiene por objetivo juntar esfuerzos y tomar medidas para que la población pueda envejecer en condiciones de seguridad y dignidad, y que adicionalmente las personas adultas mayores puedan seguir participando en sus sociedades como ciudadanos de plenos derechos. También es importante reconocer el impulso que ha dado la Oficina de la Alta Comisionada de Naciones Unidas para los Derechos Humanos, el Grupo de Trabajo de Composición Abierta sobre el Envejecimiento y la experta independiente sobre los derechos de las personas de edad para la construcción de un instrumento jurídico para promover y proteger los derechos de las personas adultas mayores a nivel internacional. Sin embargo, a pesar de los esfuerzos, todavía queda un camino por recorrer. Y en este sentido, las instituciones nacionales de derechos humanos tenemos la oportunidad de incidir en nuestros gobiernos, en nuestros estados y en la comunidad internacional para mejorar y garantizar los derechos de las personas adultos mayores en una normativa, pero sobre todo en la práctica diaria. Para finalizar, quiero agradecer nuevamente al Grupo de Trabajo sobre el Envejecimiento de GANRI por organizar este espacio de discusión y de debate. Y les invito a todos ustedes a contribuir activamente con sus valiosos aportes en favor de los derechos de las personas adultas mayores. Les deseo una jornada fructífera y llena de mucho éxito. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. And to set the scene and to update us on the recent developments as far as the United Nations is concerned on the rights of older persons, we are very lucky to have the UN independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons, Dr. Claudia Mahler, and the chair of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older Persons, or GAROP, Dr. Kiran Rabru, for their messages.
Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is an honor for me to address you remotely from Berlin, in my capacity as independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. First of all, allow me to thank the organizers, the GANRI Working Group on Aging, for this timely event to have a focused discussion on the rights of older persons in the preparation of the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging as an intersessional event. As most of you know, I took up the mandate as independent expert in May, in these unexpected and confusing days, in the beginning of the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has caused and continues to cause untold suffering across the world, with particularly worrying and wide-ranging impacts on older persons. The comprehensive report from 2016, a highly appreciated legacy from my predecessor Rosa Confeld-Matte, already provides the analytical framework for advancing the human rights protection for older persons, while it concludes that existing arrangements are inadequate and that dedicated measures to strengthen the international protection regime are required. This global pandemic has put a spotlight on the existing protection gaps and made them more visible. However, these gaps were there well before the crisis. It is regretful that it took a global pandemic to show the world that older persons and their human rights challenges associated with aging. Madam Chair, dear colleagues, from my point of view, it is urgent to discuss how we can strengthen the human rights of older persons. We have seen that the pandemic has until now had a disproportionate impact on older persons and has magnified existing violations of their rights. We have heard about the failure of the economic, social and legal systems and the shortcomings of the human rights systems from Madam High Commissioner in her speech. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has very broad effects on older persons. They have been denied health services, they have been physically and socially isolated, and they have been the victims of ageist attitudes. They have also been left behind because of the digital divide. In light of this, I have dedicated my first report, to the General Assembly to the impact of COVID-19 on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. Despite being such a diverse group, older persons in general have been labeled as vulnerable and branded as burdens to society. We have been provided with national evidence on ageist approaches during the pandemic. It is the time to have a discussion how we can work together to combat stigma and age discrimination, to change the existing negative images of older persons and negative attitudes. The pandemic has shed light on the barriers preventing older persons from fully enjoying their human rights. It has made visible protection gaps that will need to be addressed beyond the response and recovery stage. It also has highlighted the need not only for urgent action for governments in response to numerous challenges, but also for preventive measures. Efforts to protect older persons should not overlook the multiple roles older persons play in society, including as caregivers, volunteers, and community leaders. It is essential to be aware of and embrace the full diversity of older persons in the older persons category. The participation of older persons in the crisis response, including as health workers and caregivers, must be recognized. Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, although older persons constitute a focus group in the context of the pandemic, they remain chronically invisible in the human rights system. The pandemic has exposed a flagrant lack of data on older persons and their lived realities. Therefore, it is also urgent to work constructively on closing the data gaps. One way could be to include older persons in the set of indicators for some SDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, as you are aware, the UN Secretary General has issued a policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons in May 2020. As a result, 122 civil society organizations and NHRI sent letters to the Secretary General to support his work, and 146 states pledged to fully promote and respect the dignity and rights of older persons and to mitigate the negative impacts during and after the COVID-19 pandemic on their health, life, rights, and well-being. This strong support is encouraging for our timely discussions. Yet, the lack of a comprehensive and integrated international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons continues to have significant practical implications. Current instruments do not specifically address the issues of aging or make them sufficiently visible. They therefore preclude older persons from the full enjoyment of their human rights. Crucial areas have not been covered extensively. They raise a set of issues and protection concerns that deserve in-depth analysis, taking into account regional specificities and best practices. We need to address them in depth in our next discussion in the open-ended working group on aging. My guiding principle in discharging the mandate will be making older persons visible and lending them my voice. I attach particular importance in continuing the constructive dialogue with you all. We all need to engage with a broad area of actors and stakeholders, including older persons themselves, and therefore I'm very happy that we have the chance for exchange in this intersessional event to prepare the next meaningful exchange during the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group. I thank you for your attention and your support.
I would like to offer a warm thank you to the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, the Permanent Mission of the Argentine Republic to the United Nations in New York, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions for organizing such an important conference and for the invitation to provide some introductory remarks from a civil society perspective. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the UN independent expert, Claudia Mailer, for her valuable intervention. The Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, GARAP, now has over 380 diverse member organizations in 80 countries worldwide. Our vision is a world in which older persons live free from discrimination and are able to fully enjoy their rights. We are firmly united in our mission to support and enhance civil society's engagement at a national, regional, and international levels on the need for a new international instrument on the rights of older persons, a legacy that every generation will benefit from. GARAP supports older persons and civil society's participation in the UN Open-Ended Working Group on the Aging Process. The Open-Ended Working Group is a crucial opportunity for older persons to discuss our human rights and the need for a UN convention. We underline the importance of older persons bringing our voices and lived experiences into the heart of discussions around our rights in the Open-Ended Working Group and the intersessional meetings such as this to enhance the quality of debate and our understanding of our rights. To this end, GARAP ran a training program for older activists and campaigners on human rights advocacy and the Open-Ended Working Group process. Many of these older activists have since led national campaigns mobilizing more older persons to get involved and have participated in the Open-Ended Working Group session and other key meetings, including this one. We organize online webinars and working groups for our members and held regional capacity building workshops in Africa and Asia last year to strengthen our joint advocacy. We also believe that strong partnerships are fundamental in enabling us to achieve our goals. Through our advocacy tools and guidelines for members, we emphasize the value of multi-stakeholder dialogue at the national level to build understanding and consensus around older persons' human rights. National human rights institutions are valuable contributors to these discussions, and we will continue to encourage our members to work with them. Ahead of the annual Open-Ended Working Group session each year, we convene a wider meeting for all civil society organizations and national human rights institutions in New York to enable us to prepare together for the session. We look forward to further collaboration of this kind and are committed to maintaining a strong relationship with the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions at the global level. And more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed and exacerbated the challenges that older persons face in enjoying their rights. Ageism has been revealed more than ever, with shocking stories about the violation of older persons' human rights emerging from all regions of the world. We welcomed the UN Secretary General's leadership on this issue with the publication of his policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons in May 2020, and the joint statement supported by the member states that followed. Our Global Alliance believes that a UN Convention on Older Persons' Human Rights will lay the foundations necessary to ensure that the violations of older persons' rights seen during COVID-19 pandemic never happen again. As older persons and civil society organizations, we stand ready to engage constructively with national human rights institutions and governments in their work on members of the Open-Ended Working Group. I wish you all fruitful discussions in the conference today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maller and Dr. Rabaru. So as we said earlier on, in light of the global COVID-19 situation and its implications for intergovernmental meeting held at the UN headquarters in New York, a decision was made to postpone the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group, originally scheduled to be held in April 2020. And in the official announcement, the session was to be held at a later date to be announced in due course. In the meantime, consultations regarding the draft recommendations continue remotely. So, in the first session of this conference, we bring you the permanent representative of Argentina to the UN in New York and the chair-elect of the UNGA's Open-Ended Working Group for Her Excellency Maria del Carmen Squef to give updates on the status of the 11th session and the intergovernmentally negotiated recommendations.
Excellency, distinguished colleagues and friends. As Chair Designate of the United Nations General Assembly, Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, it is an honor to have been invited to the National Human Rights Institution 2020 Conference on the Right of Older Persons, in the run-up to the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. I would like to thank you, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for organizing this very important conference. This event will serve as a relevant platform to engage all main actors in a substantive and meaningful debate about the themes of the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging and situation of the human rights of older persons. In this regard, please allow me to express our most serious concern about the devastating impact to the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the lives, well-being of and human rights of older persons. They are at a significantly higher risk of mortality and severe disease following infection. According to the World Health Organization, 8 out of 10 COVID-19 deaths reported have been in older persons aged 60 years or over. They have also faced higher risks of discrimination, violence, abuse, and negligence, economic hardship to lack of social protection, among many other consequences. Since its creation by the UN General Assembly in 2010, the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging has acted as the main platform where the active participation of all the relevant actors has been visibility to the need for promoting and protecting the human rights of older persons. It has also helped to identify the gaps in existing international legal frameworks and suggesting how best to address them. The relevance of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging has been reinforced by the terrible effects of the pandemic on the life of older people. The 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group in 2021 will mark a turning point seen after the COVID-19. Nothing will be the same. The pandemic is an urgent call to leave behind abstract discussion, promote concrete actions, and improve the group's capacity to make meaningful contribution to face the new challenges. We are committed to continuing the open and constructive dialogue with all member states regarding the negotiation process of recommendation that started last February and had to be postponed because of the pandemic in order to revitalize the work of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. We are also fully committed to working very hard with the Bureau members towards the preparation of the 11th session. We look forward to having important discussion where we can all debate and reflect on the situation of the human right of older persons including during the pandemic, the recovery period, and beyond. During the worst time of the pandemic, Argentina, together with Austria, Canada, Chile, El Salvador, Morocco, Philippines, Slovenia, and Turkey, led a cross-regional core group that coordinated a statement of support of the Secretary General policy brief. The statement was signed by 146 member states and permanent observers to the United Nations. This is a clear example of how member states can join together to show their strong commitment to the promotion and protection of the rights of older persons. We look forward to continuing working with all relevant stakeholders during the 76th period of session of the General Assembly to join forces with advocacy, raise our voices, and strengthen our worldwide commitment to the rights of older people. We strongly believe that counting on your support is crucial in order to move forward and address our future challenges. Our human rights do not change with age. This is a defining moment that calls for immediate action to listen to older people's voices to combat age-based discrimination against them and fully ensure them the enjoyment of their human rights on an equal basis with others. To conclude, I wish you all a very rich and successful session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And just to highlight some points, the Ambassador did say that the open-ended working group indeed has been the main platform for the active participation of all actors for promoting and protecting the rights of older persons. And in this 11th session in 2021, it will indeed mark a turning point hopefully after the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is an urgent call to promote for concrete action. For the next 3 sessions of this conference, we have invited human rights experts from different backgrounds to talk about the normative and substantive focus areas of the 11th session of the OEWGA. Since each session will have 2 resource speakers and 1 to 2 reactors. After the discussion in each session, we will open the floor for the open forum where we will endeavor to respond to the questions sent during the pre-registration as well as questions from our participants here in the Zoom room. May I invite you, of course, to direct your attention to the Q&A box. Let's use that for our online question and answer. And I invite also our resource persons to, if we don't have enough time, then they can respond in the Q&A button as well. So resource persons, again, are invited to actively participate in the Q&A chat box. The open-ended working group has included in its agenda a segment to discuss the normative content of the focus areas of the previous session. For the 11th session, this includes discussions on the normative content for the development of a possible international standard on the focus areas of the rights of older persons to education, training, lifelong learning, and capacity building, as well as social protection and social security, including social protection floors. For the 2nd and 3rd sessions of this conference, we will focus our discussions on the normative content of these focus areas. Our panel for session 2 on the focus area of education, training, lifelong learning, and capacity building is composed of a diverse set of representatives from the government, an NHRI, and a non-government organization. Our first speaker is Dr. Matthias von Schwaden-Flugel. He is the Ministerial Director and Head of the Department of Demographic Change, Senior Citizens and Social Welfare at the Federal Ministry of Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth of Germany. Since 1991, he has been serving in the German Federal Ministry of Health in various directorates general and ministers' support staff positions, including as personal secretary, head of division of the Medical Devices Law, and deputy head of the minister's office. Dr. Schwanenflugel holds a Master of European Law degree. Our second speaker is Ms. Ana Javiera. Ms. Javiera is a sociologist and a senior specialist in the Department of Equal Treatment in the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights in Warsaw, which is a Polish national human rights institution, where since 2011 she organizes social research on discrimination based on grounds of disability, age, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and beliefs. Her tasks include monitoring the state's policy on aging and the works of the open-ended working group. She is a member of the Separate Commission of Experts on the Rights of Older Persons, advising the Polish Commissioner on Older Persons issues. In November this year, she was appointed as the NHRI representative to the GANRI Working Group on Aging. Our third speaker is Ms. Bertha Kicho from the Good Samaritan Social Service Trust, which is a non-government organization in Tanzania. Ms. Kijo is also a facilitator for the Active Aging Women Group in Mwendapole, Tanzania. Ms. Kijo has been involved in campaign activities for older people's rights for social protection and care, and has spoken as a women leader at several church events. In her community, she is responsible for community mobilization events for civic education. So without further ado, let us welcome our first speaker, Dr. Matias. You have the floor. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear colleagues, according to the German Federal Constitution, education policy is the responsibility of the federal Länder. Under the Länder laws on further training, it is mainly the task of the adult education colleges, in addition to other voluntary bodies, to ensure the basic provision of further training services in the field of general education. In Germany, we are focusing on education in old age and the related topic of digitalization. We consider it important to address these topics since both education and digitalization efforts, with all the opportunities they bring, increasingly matter for older persons in all our aging societies. It is imperative to interlink these processes in a constructive way and shape them to serve the common good. We strongly believe that the diverse life situation in old age call for new, non-formal and informal learning settings beyond the time-tested education. In particular, the new information and communication technologies open up fresh and as yet untapped development opportunities for older persons to explore. Can we see my slides? Sorry, Madam Chair. Can you see my slides? Oh my God. So next slide, it's slide number 3. The systems must be safe and secure, both in terms of their proper functioning and under privacy aspects. The responsibilities for ensuring this safety and security must be specified. Here, the involvement of older persons as co-developers of ICT and further training offers in the field is of fundamental importance as well. Already today, new media skills and literacy in the digital technologies are a prerequisite for social participation in the digital society. In the context of digital sovereignty, access to digital education becomes a must for an empowered and community-oriented life. Next slide, please. In the last years of a person's working life, faced with a progressive skills shortage, companies have the responsibility to address the loss of knowledge and skills by means of smart models. In addition to a life phase-oriented personal policy, including a work-life choice and more flexible working arrangements before and after the statutory retirement age, as elements of a modern personal management, courses such as further training for transition that prepare for post-retirement life can promote the lifelong learning and upskilling of older persons. In the context of demographic change and population aging, the right to education is not limited to children and young people and does not end with mid-adulthood or retirement, as lifelong learning is a major guarantor of active and healthy aging and social participation. Since the 1980s, study programs for senior citizens have become increasingly established in Germany. Next slide, please. Must be slide number 5. As we all know, the open-ended working group session in New York had to be cancelled this year, but we continue discussing within the German government the rights of older persons and slightly adjusted our position towards the topic and how we will further act in the open-ended working group on aging in New York. Germany will not only participate in the discussions of the open-ended working group, but if there are gaps in the international system of human rights of older persons, we will engage to close possible gaps in whichever way this might or could be. And we have also worked on the topics of lifelong learning and digitalization in the last months. An expert commission for the preparation of the federal government's eighth report has also examined the contribution that digitization and technology can make to a good life in old age and what benefits and added values they have for older people. The Commission dealt with the societal, social, and ethical issues that the increasing mechanization of everyday life for older people brings with it. A few months ago, the report Older People and Digitalization was published. Here it is. If you want to have a copy, I'll send it to you. It's in English as well. Next slide, slide number 6. Yet we are not only active in Germany, but also at EU level. As you might know, Germany is currently holding the presidency of the Council of the EU. To raise awareness of the topic and to initiate a discussion of lifelong learning and digitalization also at European level, we organized a joint online conference together with Age Platform Europe and Baxo, entitled Strengthening Older People's Rights in Times of Digitalization, Lessons Learned from COVID-19. The online conference took place end of September and more than 1,500 participants from over 60 states worldwide, including South Korea, participated in the event. But this was not only the only activity during Germany's Council presidency. We also drafted Council conclusions and negotiated them with our European partners. In October, this politically binding instrument was approved by all 27 member states of the EU. This was a major success, as the Council conclusions are the first ones in 10 years that deal with the topic of aging and older persons and their rights. In the Council conclusions, the EU and its member states commit themselves to promote lifelong learning and opportunities. They also acknowledge that older persons have a right to full participation in public, social and cultural life, as well as in education, continuous training and lifelong learning, to name just a few points. Regarding the open-ended working group on aging, the Council conclusions stated that the working group has the task, quote, to identify possible gaps and determine how these can be addressed as effectively as possible, including assessing, as appropriate, the feasibility of further instruments and measures. The Council invites Member States and the Commission, the EU Commission, to, quote, continue to contribute to the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging's meeting and give additional emphasis to the human rights approach in this field. And we are really glad that the coming presidencies of the Council of the European Union, Portugal and Slovenia will follow up on the topic of aging and rights of older persons. To conclude, having in mind the discussions of the open-ended working group's last session and regarding the rights of older people to education and lifelong learning, the rights are neither at the German national level nor at the international level in the, for instance, UN Covenant on Economic and Social Rights very specific. This is in contrary to the rights of scholars and working people. But as I have explained, education and lifelong learning is crucial, also for older people. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias. And now may I invite Anna to the floor. You have 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak today on the very important topic. And I also like to begin with congratulations to UNDESA and Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the working document prepared on the basis of inputs submitted by all stakeholders last year in response to the call of the chair of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging on this topic. You may find it on the Open-Ended Working Group's 11th session webpage. I think it's a great starting point for further discussion. And it is worth highlighting some of the document's findings today, like the one that no national law comprehensively covered all areas of education, training, lifelong learning, and capacity building, and only few provided inclusive specific guarantees to older persons. I believe that introducing the right to education in the possible new Convention on the Rights of Older Persons would make a difference in perceiving this right by decision makers and in result also in implementing it in practice. To make this general view more clear, I'm going to pick on some of the solutions proposed in the working document and briefly compare them to the current perception of the right in the question and situation of older persons in Poland. First, we should look at the definition of the right. As we learn from the working document, UNESCO describes education as an universal human right, but without mentioning older persons as rights holders. The aforementioned working document indicates that in the current normative content of the right to education, the lifelong learning and capacity building are not included. Therefore, this way, older persons are not adequately protected by the international law. Just as Professor von Schwanenflügel mentioned, we can also observe this invisibility of the group in the Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. This mirrors some general approach towards education in older age, both on national and international levels. How does it look then in practice? In Poland, educational opportunities for older persons are described more in terms of social rights, aiming on fighting against poverty, but not as a universal right that should be fulfilled. Currently, the state's activity regarding education of older persons is still presented in the Polish SDGs reports as a part of the Goal 1 on reducing poverty. This provides a false impression that education opportunities are addressed to older persons vulnerable to social exclusion only, or that the whole population of senior citizens is vulnerable in this regard, which is also not true. This kind of approach doesn't embrace the diversity among older persons. At the same time, there is nothing about education of older persons under the Goal 4, which refers to quality education for all. This shows, additionally, an uneven access to education for older persons who are completely dependent on individual project funding, availability of an NGO in their neighborhood, or individual activists. Therefore, introducing education in older age as a human right in the new possible convention would be a game changer, also in Poland. We need to talk about a huge shift in perception of this right, which would result in building a systemic approach to the education in older age, accessible in every local community. However, the change must appear on the national level first. At the moment, the ministries in Poland responsible for different types of education propose very little or nothing for older persons, as organizing and supporting education for older persons belongs more to social affairs. This should change after introducing the rights-based approach to education in older age. As in the previous century, our societies built an educational system for children and youth. Now it is time to develop accessible educational opportunities also for people in older age. The working document, which I mentioned before, defines and describes some important parts of the scope of the right and names following features of education in older age, like availability, accessibility, acceptability, adaptability. There is no time now to go deeper in those elements, but let's put it in general that those key elements of the right to education address the needs of older persons in broader context that it is fulfilled now. The leaders of NGOs dealing with education in older age in Poland report that currently they receive support, also financial support from the state, but only for short-term projects. This means that after finishing a project, older persons are left without further education opportunities, which then depend only on the attitude of their local leaders or activists. Moreover, if a leader or an activist disappears, the education opportunity will be gone as well. This has very little in common with a systemic approach. Providing legal protection in those aspects is necessary in order to make education in older age happen on a broader scale. The new binding instrument should also indicate that states should assure the education in older age without any discrimination and in a way adequate to the needs of older persons. In Poland, in 2018, the number of older persons participating in educational activities was extremely low, about 1.6% among persons at the age between 55 and 74. The number shows that taking part at an older age in Poland is an exception. The reasons are not only hidden in the lack of state systemic approach, but we should assume that it is also a result of a general perception or even a stereotype of poor learning capabilities and lack of will to learn in older age. Those stereotypes should be also tackled by states. To conclude, I would like to reiterate the UN Secretary General reflection on the current situation of older persons during COVID, formulated in his policy brief in May. Antonio Guterres not only indicates the need to include older persons in lifelong learning programs and enhance access to information, but he also calls for accelerating the efforts of the General Assembly Working Group to develop proposals for an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons. This is crucial to make broad access to education for older persons happen sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And now, may I give the floor to Bertha for her reaction, presentation, or response. You have 5 minutes, Bertha.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Yes, we can hear you, Bertha. Go ahead.
ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this important conference to share some few points on the normative content for the development of a possible international standard on the focus area of education, training, lifelong learning, and capacity building. I would like to react to the speaker on few points. Introduction of the right to education, the possible new convention on the right of older sorry. Would make a difference in perceiving this right by decision makers. This move is very important because surely it will make all the governments have something binding. Governments will work on this right by incorporating the right in the national policy, as well several strategic plans they make in their state obligations. In Tanzania, education for older people is mentioned in the National Aging Policy 2003. The new convention will help to put changes which will make the policy be more effective in the areas of education, lifelong learning in older people. For example, if you are working on a strategic plan to combat, let's say, COVID-19, by creating awareness to the community, the older people will understand better the disease if they are educated in things like reading literacy and other skills needed. Understand the information given in the posters or short messages sent to educate people. The classes can be used to impart knowledge on older people. This getting a number of older people at one place. Many life-changing skills can also be given at the classes. In one of our classes in Tanzania, older people are taught how to grow vegetables for their own use. This helps them to keep them healthy and also earn a living by selling their vegetables. And again, this will be a right to be fulfilled, not only spoken or written. The convention will fulfill the basic human rights for education. It will allow other people to practice their basic human right. Many governments have policies which indicate the education for older people. But as we can see, the implementation is very low. More emphasis and resources are put in educating the young people. This will also reduce ageism, stereotyping. Stereotyping is another factor of ageism to education and lifelong learning in our countries. In our country, some young people feel older people do not need education, as they had their share of working when they were young. What would you do with education when you are old? No employment when you are old. The new convention will help the governments to create programs to help young people to embrace education and lifelong learning in the older generation and encourage them to learn new skills. The convention will help governments to create friendly education and long learning programs and allocate funds for them, monitor and evaluate their successes and challenges. Now, work with NGOs working in this area with older people and provide guidance and funding whenever possible. The cultural and negative attitudes. The convention can also help governments to deal with cultural beliefs or attitudes of older people. When we have meetings with other older people to create awareness of the right to education, older people have given up the hope of learning again. They think that learning is for young people only. If they go back to learn, young people will laugh at them. This is true in some circumstances. I faced this problem when I started my university education at an older age. But later on, I took this challenge as a strength to push me to work hard, and here I am now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bertha. Just to be able to get some points from our speaker. Of course, Matthias has emphasized the diverse life situation in older age and the call for non-formal and informal models in education and digitalization or the digital age has indeed opened fresh opportunities to explore. And he underscored digital sovereignty, but of course we must be able to mind also the digital divide that has caused, well, in this time of COVID, there's really an over-reliance on technologies right now, and digital divide has seen a lot of perhaps those groups that have been left behind, including older persons. For Anna, introducing the right to education in a new convention will indeed make a difference in the perceptions of decision makers and in policy and practice as well. And she underscored the scope of the definition of the right. The normative content indeed does not include lifelong learning and capacity building, which makes older persons unprotected. For Bertha, of course, a new convention would help put changes to make policy become more effective on education and lifelong learning of older persons. And she has cited specific examples in Tanzania. So thank you very much. I now open the discussion with a question given during the pre-registration from Brankika Jankovic of the Republic of Serbia. And the question is as follows. Before that, of course, we'd like to invite Dr. Mahler to join in the open forum as well. The question goes like this. Can you give examples of some adapted forms of vocational education and trainings for elderly for the use of IT devices and modern technology? So maybe I would like to invite Matthias to start off and answer this question. This is also related to another question that was posed by Tatiana Sorokan of Help Age International from Moldova. And their question goes like this. What are the rights of older persons in the context of digitalization and the COVID-19 pandemic? Matthias, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. To give some concrete examples, I talked about the council conclusions, and in the council conclusions, the council highlights different forms of education and training, lifelong learning opportunities, and the development of skills, including technological and digital skills. And it highlights to shape the digitalization with regard to, in particular, such as public services as health, social and long-term care services, in such a way that these services are easily accessible, user-friendly, and as barrier-free as possible. And the conclusion highlights to facilitate, where possible, easy online access to a wide range of cultural, educational, and learning facilities, and to enable remote participation in social, educational, and cultural events, and to support older persons in developing concrete digital skills so that they can participate in social life, and to assist and empower older persons regarding everyday tasks and everyday situation. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Are there any other resource persons who would like to respond to that question? You can just raise your hand. Yes, Anna.
I just wanted to mention that during COVID, we face that many educational opportunities, including education on digital world, are closed because the NGOs are not able to provide the services. And even if there are some trainings online for other persons who are struggling with laptops and computers, it is too difficult. They already excluded from the educational opportunities. Therefore, this is so important to prepare the educational opportunities in advance, and in the post-pandemic world, to be prepared already and to work smoothly with the education on digitalization as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Bertha, would you like to respond, or we can go to the next question and you can take this. There is another question from Bernard Wabuge of the Kenya Small Scale Farmers Forum. What are the capacity needs of country CSOs and how do we unify our engagement? And relating to that, this advocacy for a convention on the rights of older persons, this is a question from Naraidu Vijay of Mauritius, Deputy Chair of GAROP. How far can we go in mobilizing the grassroots in favor of a convention for the rights of older persons? Maybe you can include in your response also as a final message, how do you think a convention will help in ensuring the right to education of older persons will be further protected? And that's from our independent expert who would want to probably discuss that later on. But Bertha, would you like to respond to that?
Oh, okay.
Yes, we hear you.
Hello?
Yes, Bertha, we hear you. Go ahead.
Oh.
I think Bertha is having some connection problems. That's part of our new normal now. Maybe I can ask Anna to weigh in.
Yes, I think we need as much support for the new convention as just possible. If we are asking for the grassroots campaigners, how much they should involve people in that regard. And I suppose I would like to stress also that how important is fighting against those stereotypes. Just on the grassroots levels, the people who are themselves involved, they picturing themselves that it is a false stereotype, that the older persons can learn and can do this, and also can win the decision makers to be more involved in introducing the new convention because of that, and because showing that older persons really need the education in older age, and the new convention could provide it in broader scale than we have it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Matthias, can you respond? Would you like to respond to the questions?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think as we do it in the working group in New York, it is really important to have civil society on board, because it's for the people and not for the countries and not for the member states, for the people that we want to change something, and that we try to look if there are any gaps and discuss how these gaps can be closed, and especially training and lifelong learning. As I said earlier on, it's crucial for older people, and we can see that in the pandemic, also in Germany, that people have to switch to computers, and elderly people, older people, when they try to get into contact with their relatives, they many of them use computers these days. They Skype or they Zoom, and so they have to get the skills. They have to know the skills. So we have to have them on board when we discuss on the UN level, but we have to have them on board also when it comes to face the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. And Bertha, are you back? If you can't connect, maybe I'd like to invite you to just chat on our Q&A chat box so that we can hear your answer. But let's try one more time. Bertha, are you there? Okay, it seems like there will be there's still a connection problem. So Claudia, Dr. Mahler, would you like to respond to the questions? You have the floor.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
It's perfect to address you from Berlin, and I just wanted to add once again, thank you to the organizers, and thank you to all the speakers. I wanted to add that I think it's crucial to also have the relation with the SDGs and try to introduce indicators to see exactly where we have the gaps and where we need to implement more. And coming back to the perfect question, how much we can rely on the grassroots NGOs, I think they are crucial because they bring the pressure and they show the needs that we really need them on the floor. And what Matthias also said, we need to include them in the open-ended working group. We need to make their voices heard. So from my perspective, I think it's the perfect thing to include the older persons movement, the NGOs, the grassroots, and also as Bethel had reiterated, it is crucial for them to have a framework to come back to the rights-based approach and to learn more about the rights. Thank you so much for including me in the discussion.
Thank you so much. And indeed, it's really very important to have that perspective, always to be conscious about the Sustainable Development Goals and make visible where older persons are in the attainment of Sustainable Development Goals. And this was presented to us very clearly earlier by the speakers. Do we have any more questions on the floor? Perhaps you can just raise your hand or probably enter a question in the Q&A chat box. I don't see any, but we do have a suggestion here or a request that this is from Kate Swaffer. Thank you for this important session. Please advise if the recording will be available afterwards. It will indeed be available. It will be available in the websites of all the organizers here. We will provide a link, including the National Human Rights of Korea. And also in the Philippines, we will provide a link in our FB page as well as in our website. So don't forget to like all the social media accounts of all the organizers here today. So are there any more questions? Would you like to raise anything or any additions from our resource person? I see Claudia's hand. Claudia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Then I take the opportunity to also raise one's awareness that it's also crucial to have the discussion on the regional floor and on the national floor. So I would also like to invite you all to start the discussion, if not done till now, on the national level, to get included with your administration, with your government, with your civil society, with your NHRIs on the national level, to discuss the different topics and bring the issues to the open-ended working group on aging with your specific focus. Thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to see you all on the next open-ended working group.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matthias, Anna, Bertha, and of course, Claudia, for a very engaging discussion on the right to education, training, lifelong learning, and capacity building for older persons. We now move on to our third session. Our next session is on the normative content for the development of a possible international standard on the focus area of social protection and social security, including social protection floors. Our panel for session 3 is composed of a diverse set of representatives, once again, from the United Nations, from an NHRI, and a non-government organization. Our first speaker is Professor Marvin Formosa. Professor Formosa holds the post of Director of the International Institute on Aging, United Nations, Malta, and is an Associate Professor at the Department of Gerontology and Dementia Studies, Faculty for Social Well-Being at the University of Malta. He also holds the posts of Chairperson of the National Commission for Active Aging and Rector's Delegate for the University of the Third Age. Professor Formosa published widely in the field of aging studies, and recent publications include Active and Healthy Aging, Gerontological and Geriatric Inquiries, that was in 2018, and the University of the Third Age and Active Aging, European and Asian Pacific Perspectives in 2019. He is country team leader of Malta of the Survey of Health, Aging and Retirement in Europe, or SHARE, founded the International Journal on Aging in Developing Countries, and his academic interests include older adult learning, universities of the third age, and critical gerontology. Our second speaker is Dr. Dongwoo Lee. Dr. Lee is working with the Social Rights Division and is the Deputy Director of the International Human Rights Division of the National Human Rights Commission of Korea. Our third speaker is Bridget Sleep. Bridget is the Senior Rights Policy Advisor at Help Age International, a global network of organizations promoting the right of all older people to lead dignified, healthy, and secure lives. After working at the Universidade Eduardo Mondlane at Mozambique, or in Mozambique, Bridget completed a master's degree in international human rights at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, University of London. Since then, she has worked on human rights and development at the Panos Institute, International Family Health, and now Help Age International, where she focuses on strengthening the rights of older people. So Marvin, the floor is yours. You have 7 minutes. You're on mute. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. You do this many times, but you always forget. Thank you very much, organizers, for this excellent and much needed conference on human rights of older persons. Even though there are many such activities on this sort, is always not enough. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes here to present Malta's perspective on social protection and mostly social inclusion as well for older persons. First slide, please. Just because we are here for an international audience, I thought it would be good if I would pinpoint where Malta is. Perhaps not such an issue for our European colleagues, but if you're from United States or Asia, you may not know where Malta is. It's a small island in the Mediterranean, and of course we are renowned for our historical baggage, but also for our seas, for our beautiful seas. Third slide, please. As far as aging is concerned, third slide, next slide, please. As far as aging is concerned, we do actually punch above our weight. Although we are a small island, about 19 miles by 24 miles, with just a population of less than half a million. As far as population aging is concerned, yes, we do punch above our weight. And as you can see, I mentioned there, I put some milestones. In fact, in 1968, the Maltese government was the first nation to put on the table on the United Nations the fact that we're going to have this massive challenge, the challenge of population aging. And in fact, in 1986, the United Nations and the government of Malta actually established an International Institute on Aging, which is still based in Malta, in Valletta. Next, please. And in 1987, Malta was one of the first countries to have a junior ministry. At that time, it was called for the care of the elderly. And in 2013, this was renamed Junior Minister for Active Aging. Next, please. And next. And this is very much hot off the press, hot from the oven, as they say. Just 2 weeks ago, the government of Malta recognized the challenges that aging has. For many people, aging is perhaps an easy subject, but we know how much complex this subject is. And the government of Malta recognizes this and it has established a ministry completely for active aging, and it is called the Ministry for Senior Citizens and Active Aging. At the time I was writing this PowerPoint, it was not yet, the name was not yet confirmed, but now I can confirm that we have a complete ministry dedicated to active aging and older persons. Next slide, please. And we do have and next slide, please. I thought I was going to, yeah. And in fact, Malta does punch above its weight, because as you can see there, for example, Malta leads in healthy life expectancy amongst EU countries. One of Malta's strengths is that we are a small island, we are a small island state, and we have, as I shall explain in later slides, we have a wide coverage of social services, which can reach all of the persons in the island very easily. Next slide, please. Again, next, right? So, no, one before, please. Right. So the active aging index. Well, it's not everything is positive in Malta, and we do have our greatest challenge is the low percentages of older workers. When you look at the numbers and percentages of older persons, let's say, or older workers above the age of 55, we come at almost the penultimate stage. If you look at the active aging index, we do very, very poorly. But as you know, active aging is not just the participation of older persons in the labor market. It's much wider than that. It focuses on being independent, social participation, and also capacity for active aging. And it's good that the past 10 years or so, Malta, as you can see, tops the list of the advances that it made, basically. And we worked hard so that our position, which perhaps could have been much better in 2011 on the active aging index, was improved in the past few years. And how did we improve this? Next slide, please. Next. First of all, we have one back. First of all, we have one slide back, please. First of all, we have an active aging strategy. We have a strong active aging strategy which was launched in 2010-13 up to 2010-20. So it reached its term this year, and next year we're going to have another active aging strategy for the next 7 years. We also were the 16th country in the world to have a national dementia strategy, and we titled it Empowering Change. So basically, we have a very strong strategy focus on how to deal with the number of older persons with dementia in Malta. At present, we have 7% of persons aged 60 plus with dementia. Next slide, please. And we also have national minimum standards for all care homes and long-term care institutions. Next slide, please. But if you were to ask me what makes Malta's policy on aging not so unique, because we have also heard from the Minister of Germany and also from the representative from Poland. I'm sure that other countries are doing their own the job as well. But ultimately, our focus in Malta is that human rights do not become obsolete with age. In the sense that the problem with human rights is that we tend to safeguard the human rights for children, for adolescents, for adults, for middle-aged persons. But once people reached their 60th birthday, their 65th, their 65th birthday, their 70th birthday, unfortunately, let's say, society, civil society, does not continue to take any much notice of what is their basic human rights. So as you can see, we try in Malta that through the active aging strategy, that there are pensions for all older persons and minimum pensions even for those who never worked, especially women. Being a southern Mediterranean and southern European country, we have many women who have never been in paid employment, and so even if you never paid, you have a minimum pension. There are acute health is free for everybody, and not just for Maltese, but for everybody who holds a European Union citizenship. There are also various community care services, and we have care services which are not so much found in other countries, like even domiciliary dentistry. So if you are homebound in your home, you cannot go out, a dentist will come and visit you, for example. Another could be the dementia intervention team. Every person who is diagnosed with dementia will have a team made up of an occupational therapy, physiotherapy, nurse, and even a psychologist coming to your house, to your home for consultancy. And also free taxi services within cities, etc. And of course, state-funded care homes, rehabilitation hospital, and even geriatric hospitals. Next slide, please. And the next slide will connect, of course, with the previous section, with the previous session, because we also have a very strong university of the third age. But again, continuing on our idea that human rights do not become obsolete with age, we also have launched last year, the first university of the fourth age. So basically, because we know that people who are in care homes are not able to attend universities of the third age, so we basically founded universities in the fourth age in all public care homes. So all public care homes, thank you, Claire, just 30 seconds. So all public care homes have a university of the fourth age. So basically, all the persons with mobility difficulties, all the persons with cognitive difficulties, all the persons with dementia also have an opportunity to engage in lifelong learning. And for us, this is very important because it follows the issues of equity and social justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marvin. We now move on to the presentation of Dr. Lee Dong-woo. You have the floor. You have 7 minutes. Sansangmin. You're on mute.
방금 소개받은 이동우입니다. 저는 대한민국 국가인권위원회 사인권과에서 노인인권 실무자로 일하고 있습니다. 오늘 노인인권 회의를 통해 전 세계 국가인권 기구 동료 여러분과 만나고 노인의 인권 보호와 증진에 관하여 얘기 나눌 수 있어 매우 기쁩니다. 다음, 제가 오늘 말씀드리고자 하는 내용은 UN 고령화 실무그룹 제11차 회의 주제 중 사회보장과 사회보호, 사회보호 최저선에 관한 것인데요. 특히 코로나19 팬데믹 재난 상황에서의 노인의 존엄한 삶과 죽음, 사회 안전망에 대하여 대한민국의 사례를 중심으로 말씀드리고자 합니다. 잠시 목차를 봐주시면 코로나19 시대의 노인의 취약성 심화, 한국 노인의 인권 상황, 노인을 위한 사회 안전망으로 관련 법령, 대한민국 법령에 있어서의 규범적인 내용, 그리고 노인 인권 보호와 증진을 위한 대한민국 국가인권위원회의 활동 순서로 말씀드리겠습니다. 세계 인권 선언 그리고 사회권 규약은 모든 사람의 존엄성과 권리에 있어 평등하고 적절한 생활 수준을 누릴 권리가 있음을 규정하고 있습니다. 이러한 기본적 인권 보장과 인간으로서의 존엄은 연령으로 인하여 결코 훼손되거나 폄하되어서는 안 되는 가치임에도 불구하고 여전히 수많은 노인들은 빈곤, 자살, 학대와 차별, 사회적 배제 등 다양한 문제에 직면하고 있으며 심지어 사회적
as well
부담으로까지
as
인식되고 있는 것이
discrimination,
현실입니다.
and they're also seen as a burden to, burden to
2011년
society as
발표된
well.
유엔 사무총장
And
보고서에서도
also they're suffering
이러한
from
노인이
violence,
겪고
abuse,
있는
long-term care issues, as well as rights
상시적인
to work.
문제에 대해서
And also the
심각한
UN
인권
Secretary
문제로
General's
제시한 바
report in
있습니다.
2011 also pointed out the seriousness of this older rights
코로나19 확산에
issues
따른
back in
세계적 위기
2011.
상황에서 가장 많은
Especially as
사망자는
we see the spread of COVID-19
노인입니다.
pandemic around the world,
대다수 노인은
the older
만성 질환을 앓고 있기
persons are
때문에
actually
코로나19 치명률이
are actually suffering from
다른
the biggest
연령대에 비하여 압도적으로 높으며
pain from
전
the
세계 80세 이상 노인의 치명률은
COVID-19
모든
pandemic.
연령
Especially,
사망자
we're
평균의
seeing a lot of
5배에
people here, the older persons are suffering
올해
from
4월 13일
diseases,
대한민국
and we see 5
국가인권위원장
times more
관리
death
고령화
rates among the older
실무그룹
citizens.
이런
And also the
코로나19 확산
NHRI
상황에서
chairperson, as well as the
취약계층
chairperson of the
노인에 대한
working
불충분한
group,
의료
Choi
조치와
Young-hae,
돌봄 서비스
also
및
pointed out the problems in
사회적
terms
고립이
of the
매우
lack
우려되는
of care and also the isolation
각국
of the older
정부가
persons in
우선적으로
society, so that the
노인
government
인권
has to
보호에
put a focus
힘써줄
on
것을
protecting
요청한
and
바
promoting the human rights of older persons.
유엔 사무총장도 지난 5월 발표한
UNSG as
코로나19와
well,
이
back
노인
in
인권
May
정책
of this
보고서에서
year,
코로나19가
published the
노인의
UN
생명,
Secretary General's
건강,
policy brief
권리,
on the impact of
노년의
COVID-19 on
삶에
older persons, that
심각한
COVID-19 is
위험을
having a serious
초래한다고
impact in
우려한 바
terms of the
있습니다.
dignity as well as the life of older persons.
다음,
Next page, please.
코로나19의 위협은 노인이 가진
The
취약성을
threat of
더욱
COVID-19
선명하게
has
드러냅니다.
actually increased vulnerabilities to the older
만성 질환이
persons.
있기 때문에 감염에
Because of
의한
the chronic
치명률이 높고
diseases, they
만성
can
질환이
fall
흔한
victim
노인은
to
지속적인
the
돌봄을
virus
필요로
infection.
한다는
It also
취약성
requires continuous
요양원
care
등
services,
집단
and as a
시설에서
result,
생활하는
various care
경우가 많아
facilities and
감염의
various care
위험이 더 높으며
homes become the accommodation places for these
요양기관에서
people
집단
who are
감염의 사례가
exposed to
계속
the
발생하고
infection of the
있고
virus, and we see cluster
또
infections taking place
요양원에서는
around the
노인들이
care
방치되어
facilities
사망한 사례도
where
있습니다.
the older citizens are staying at, and we
만성
also saw
질환이
a lot
흔한
of deaths of
노인들은
older
주기적인 약 처방과 일상적인 활동 보조 등이 필요하지만
drugs, and they
동물
also need to get
돌봄의
access to
공백도
regular
우려되는
exercises. But we also see problems in terms of the vacuum of the care services for persons, the older persons. The chairperson of the NHRCK, Choi Young-hae, made an announcement, the statement on the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, that the older persons are exposed to the vulnerabilities in daily lives, and they're actually at the brink of life and death situation. So in order to protect these people, we have to actually inspect and strengthen the social safety net to protect the vulnerable to older persons, and the human rights should be considered as a first top priority in this process. Now, human rights, as well as looking at the international standards for the protection of human rights, we have to look at the current situations of older persons in Korea. The central government as well as local governments need to understand the mandates and the responsibilities imposed on them. Next page, please. The Republic of Korea understands that the aging especially is taking place at a very, very fast rate in this country amongst other countries in the world. As we are moving from the age society to super age society, maybe many older persons are suffering from various issues such as poverty, suicide, as well as lonely death. Especially women, elders, are actually suffering from a lot of issues, especially in terms of their social situations. There is a combination of various discriminations against women, so they're exposed to multiple discrimination on top of being an older person. And on top of that, we're seeing the pandemic taking place around the world, and the discrimination against women, as well as the elders, is actually getting worse. In order for anyone to be able to live in dignity, everybody has a right to a dignified life and death. Under the Constitution of the Republic of Korea, the Framework Act on Social Security, Framework Act on Low Birth Rate in the Aging Society, as well as Social Welfare Services Act, Welfare of Older Persons Act, Long-Term Care Insurance Act, as well as the Act on Guarantee of Promotion of Convenience of Persons with Disabilities, the Ages and Pregnant Women, we focus on the guarantee of human rights of all persons, and especially everybody has a right to happiness and to live in dignity. And these provisions have been stipulated in relevant laws. Also, the Korean government looks at various social risks and problems that senior citizens will be facing in this aging society, and various efforts are being made, especially the basic pension as well as long-term care facilities. Long-term care-related services have been put in place as a framework, and various policies are being legislated and are being revised in order to protect the human rights of elder citizens. And especially there is a process for collecting opinion from various stakeholders, especially through public hearings. However, there are still blind spots left in society in the process. And in the 11th open-ended working group on aging, there was a survey conducted in the run-up to the 11th session. And actually, last year, the NHRCK has expressed opinions from the survey. And for the 10th session in 2019, there were various focus topics that were addressed, which is related to Social Security and social protection, how to actually better define the normative content related to that. And there was a survey conducted to that regard. And among the Korean examples that we cited, those people that were receiving disability support for their activities. And once a disabled person becomes 65 years of age or is classified as a senior citizen, the long-term care service becomes the main category to which the person will belong to. And the number of hours that the person was able to get previously would be reduced dramatically, because the classification changes as a person becomes a senior citizen. And on the 3rd of December, the chairperson of the NHRCK noticed the importance of this issue, said that the Korean government as well as the National Assembly must work harder to provide or to revise relevant laws in relation to providing the activity support services to the elder citizens. NHRCK understands the severity of this issue. So back in 2016, it expressed opinion that the relevant laws need to be revised. However, there was no progress made. So for those people with disabilities, as they reach 65, we're actually asking for emergency support from the government. We understand that there was a violation of the right to life. Starting from September 2019, we had 8 rounds of recommendations put forward for providing such emergency support for people with disabilities who are becoming senior citizens. And in the National Assembly session, they passed a law. And this was a good example where the NHRCK recommendation was adopted in the legislation of the law. And last year, the opinion letter is what I'm showing you over here. So, going forward as well, NHRCK will work to fully safeguard and protect the rights of the senior citizens, and we will continue to monitor situations and provide relevant recommendations to the Republic of Korea to protect the human rights of elder citizens. Especially, we have to take a human rights-centered approach, have to look at the impact the COVID-19 situation is having on the vulnerable groups, especially what is the implications on the most vulnerable members of society, what are the long-term measures needed on the part of the government, and that is what we need to do going forward. The crisis posed by COVID-19 is having the most severe impact on the most vulnerable members of society, and their vulnerabilities are only worsening. Not only the elder citizens, but the refugees as well as the LGBTI, they're being affected in a different manner. Especially the poor people would have limited access to goods and services in the private sector market. And because of a shutdown of school, it would have an impact on the right to education. I understand I'm using up a lot of time, so let me finish up. So in the COVID-19 pandemic, the vulnerabilities of the elder citizens are only aggravating, especially when a lot of older citizens are affected by the COVID-19 infection. It is very important for us to work to protect the dignity of these people, and they have to be able to guarantee the dignity as they face the end of life.
Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I'd also like to thank both the presenters for their rich and informative presentations. In reaction, I'd like to make 3 points. Firstly, I'd like to expand on the normative element of adequacy. The pandemic has exposed just how inadequate many pension and other social security measures are. And inadequate levels of entitlements result in dependency on others and undermine our autonomy. So a core element of the right to social security is that entitlements must be of a high enough value, quantity, and quality to ensure that we can live dignified and autonomous and independent lives and fully participate in society in our older age. Secondly, I'd like to explore a bit further non-discrimination as a core element. Yes, it's fundamental that older persons enjoy this right without any discrimination on the grounds of gender. And Marvin mentioned the gendered work histories that women may have and the gender biases that can be built into the design of social security and social protection schemes. But we must also ensure that there are no discriminatory pension penalties for those who wish to continue working after normal retirement age, and that older persons with disabilities are not subjected to discriminatory age limits in disability-related social security measures. We also need to recognize disparities in life expectancies between different populations, for example, between Indigenous and non-Indigenous population groups. Older persons who have been forcibly displaced, older refugees and asylum seekers should all have equal access to social security measures available to the general population. And social security contributions and pension entitlements of older persons with migration histories must also be recognized. Discrimination can take many forms, and it needs to be unpacked when we're looking at the normative elements of this right. My third point is around the interdependency of rights, in particular that of the right to fully participate in society, which has been mentioned by a number of speakers today. A core element of the right to social security is that older persons have the right to participate in decision-making processes regarding the shape and content of social security and social protection measures. They also have the right to participate in the management and administration of these measures. And these different types of participation have to be addressed when we look at the normative elements of this right. And I'd just like to finish with one last reflection on the presentations. I was pleased to hear that the presenters address an element of the right to social security that is often neglected, and that is the right to social security against insufficient support from families. Care and support systems around the world are woefully inadequate, and as the pandemic has shown with care homes, can be completely at odds with human rights standards. This element, that of the right to care and support, needs to be elaborated in an international human rights law. And I would argue elaborated as a standalone right, but grounded in the existing normative elements of the right to social security. I'd like to finish there and look forward to any questions that the participants may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Now we go into the open forum, but of course, let's see what we have here from the advanced questions that we have gathered. From Randy Escolango of the Insurance Commission of the Philippines. how can we protect and strengthen the rights of older persons, especially in these trying times of the pandemic? A related question comes from Christopher Castillo of the Government Service Insurance System, also of the Philippines. What are the steps being undertaken by government and international institutions to protect older persons against the threat of COVID-19? Perhaps we can start with Marvin.
Well, not so easy questions. Because of course, I think governments, this is a personal opinion, are still, coming to grasp as how this, first of all, how to deal with the present COVID situation, and secondly, how to ensure that the post-COVID period is also, takes care of the most vulnerable persons. But if you had to ask me, I think we should take a close look at three basic aspects of quality of life. First of all, access to physical, access to hospital services. I think the pandemic showed that although we think that pathways to health services are smooth, they are actually not smooth at all in crisis situations. Sometimes even in non-crisis situations, healthway pathways are not that smooth. But of course, when there's a pandemic, it becomes chaotic. Secondly, social participation, as Bridget has mentioned. I mean, in normal times, actually there are a good number of older persons who do not manage to participate socially, who do not participate in the decision-making process, and I think this is very important. Older persons should not be enabled to take part in social events which are just leisure-oriented events, but older persons must be very much part and parcel in the decision-making process, both at the local authority levels and also at the national levels. I mean, this is something that I see all the time. Decisions concerning older persons are usually taken in a top-bottom manner, and of course, older persons are neglected. And finally, and I think this is the topic of the Open Working Group and this particular conference, seminar, human rights. I mean, older persons are citizens. They have citizenship rights. They have human rights, and so we need to discuss how older persons are humans. I'm going to generalize here, and I will end with this note. I'm going to cut a lot of corners, but in essence, in many situations, once the pandemic took hold of our imagination, older persons were all of a sudden labeled as patients. All of a sudden were being labeled as sub-citizens in a sort of way the right word in English, but this is something that hurt me a lot. That all of a sudden, because we labeled them as vulnerable, their human aspects were not so much catered for. And I think we should prepare that for the future. The human rights of older persons, economical, social, and other related to dignity and autonomy, are safeguarded.
Thank you very much, Marvin. Nomushi, would you like to respond to the questions? How can we protect and strengthen the rights of older persons, especially in these trying times of the pandemic? I think you're on mute.
예, 제가
Thank you. So let me take the floor. Just like any other countries in the world, the Republic of Korea as well is looking at the COVID-19 pandemic situation, and the people that are actually suffering the biggest death rate is the other citizens. Among the confirmed cases, we look at the mortality rate of people who died from the infection of the virus, and we release these statistics on a daily basis. But we shouldn't be bogged down on the numbers. We have to understand the underlying factors behind the statistics. We have to understand that a person's life actually comes to an end. There's an African saying that when a senior person dies, it is just like losing a library. Just as the saying suggests, we need to understand the dignity, the element that is involved in the process of a person coming to the end of their life, and we have to use it as an opportunity to do a sober reflection on ourselves. Next, we look at social safety nets and protection policies. Of course, they're applicable to all countries around the world, but the universal values called human rights, as well as international human rights standards, need to be developed in that area as early as possible. The UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as CESC, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, they're there in place, but we need to have a legally binding document, international document on the human rights of older persons, and the relevant legal provisions and instruments would have to be established, and then UN member nations must use them as a reference to make sure that these elements are actively utilized in their national policies, and also the implementation instruments would have to be established within the framework of the international conventions. I believe that is one way for strengthening the protection of older citizens in the pandemic situation.
Thank you very much, Dong Wuxi. And I'd like to invite Bridget. I think maybe you can give us some news from the UK. I understand the vaccines are on a rollout soon. And perhaps you can share your views on that as well. And here in the Philippines, we're actually advocating for vaccine equity and to ensure that those who need it will get it, and older persons included. So maybe you can share that bit of good news for us.
Well, I hope it's good news. Yes. So as you will have read, the vaccines are now arriving. The Pfizer vaccines are now arriving in the UK, and they're hoping to start vaccinating people next week, as I understand from listening to the news. And I think, as you say, Karen, so the ensuring that there is non-discrimination, that there is equity in the vaccination rollout is absolutely critical. And I think that the issue of discrimination is a core one to answer the question around how to strengthen the rights of older people, particularly during the time of the pandemic, because what we have seen is in a large number of countries around the world, the introduction of public health measures that have discriminated against older people on the basis of their age. Measures that have confined or restricted older people's movement, that have prevented them from using public transport, from participating in social activities or gatherings, from going to restaurants, a whole range of different age-based public health measures that have denied older people their rights compared to people of younger ages. We've also seen age used as a criterion to deny older people access to scarce medical resources in ICTU. And so I think that what the pandemic has shown, that if we want to strengthen and protect older people's rights, we have to start at the fundamentals and start with non-discrimination. And I think that the reason why So many countries have introduced these age-based measures, and there has been so little outcry and resistance against them, is because age discrimination is not taken as seriously in national or international law as other forms of discrimination. So to start at improving national legislation to ensure that age is treated as seriously as other grounds for discrimination, to ensure that exemptions are not justified for age discrimination, where they, in the same way that they're not justified on the grounds of gender or race. I think this would be a starting point. And I also agree with Dr. Lee in terms of the need for an international convention to complement better protection at the national level as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bridget. I believe our independent expert would like to also respond to the question. Claudia?
Thank you, Karen, for giving me the floor again. I would also like to thank the presenters for their presentation, and I would like to add that what we have also keep in mind that preventive actions need to bear older persons and include them in their measures. And we have also heard about the social security systems, and from my point of view, we also have to keep in mind that many of the older persons have had some kind of occupation which are not taking part in the official labor market. So we also have to improve their situation on social security. And what Bridget reiterated once again, that we have to keep in mind that the discrimination based on age and, from my perspective, also on gender needs to be implemented in a new instrument if we ever come to this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Claudia. We now proceed to another set of questions relating to the focus area, relating the focus area to the discussions on the proposed convention. And here's another question from Yong-mi of the ASEM Global Aging Center. What would be the possible measures to promote the participation of older persons in the process of framing the convention? And perhaps as a final message, maybe we can respond to this question coming from Chong Myong-ja of All Human Beings, a human rights research institute. Why are the human rights of older persons so crucial, while some argue that people lose their ability as they age and do not deserve attention or even respect? Maybe we can begin with Bridget.
Thank you, Karen. How to promote participation of older people in the process towards convention? I think that certainly, as now we're all interacting on Zoom, and it's likely, I imagine, that the next open-ended working group session itself is going to be virtual. I think we really do have to address the whole area of digital access and enabling people to participate in these types of discussions and processes. So I would certainly hope that the open-ended working bureau, and we heard from the chair-elect, the ambassador from Argentina earlier this morning, I hope that they ensure that the voices of older people and the civil society organizations that represent them are fully heard virtually in the open-ended working process this next session and future ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we can hear from Marvin. Would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I think, first of all, the extent of participation of older persons at the moment in all spheres is unprecedented. I mean, so we have to look at the positive side of things. So if we go back, I have been in this field for about 25 years now, and 25 years ago, let's say, even in Southern Europe, you know, I mean, not only the human rights of older persons were not discussed, but even the concept of old age was not discussed. So we have to be, we have also to be optimistic as well that if the trends continue as they are, in the next 15 years, there will be much more pressure on governments on the behalf of older persons. And secondly, I would also like to put in an academic comment, a gerontological comment. I mean, what I mean is that older persons, despite being persons, despite not being different from others, but are also unique. So I think we need to understand older persons much better than we do. We need to empathize with older persons. We need to empathize with later life. Most of whom, these people in later life, they have various challenges, physical challenges, also social capital changes, widowhood, for example. They are also grappling with disability. So it's not as easy as one may think that an older person has a voice or actually wishes to voice his or her opinions. So we must also ensure that just as much as we understand that women, ethnic minorities, the LGBTIQ are similar to other persons, but are also unique, I think this is something that the Human Rights Convention should also focus upon. And to my view, it has not been done yet. We also need to focus on the uniqueness of older persons.
Thank you very much, Marvin. And of course, Dr. Lee Dongwoo-shi, would you like to respond and have the final response in this session?
Yes.
노인 권리 협약에
In regards to the UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, I've already emphasized the importance of reaching the consensus. But whether there are people with disabilities or women or children, yes, we do have relevant conventions in place. But especially for the older persons, there are special considerations to be reflected. For example, unlike those people with disabilities or women or children, we have to actually focus on the fact that they become physically aged and also mentally aged, and all these factors have to be taken into consideration in the development process. And so it is really important to define the human rights of older persons, as was mentioned by Bridget. Their voice would have to be reflected in the process, and the right to participation must be guaranteed. Going back to the topic of the session, which is a second session, especially for the right to lifelong learning. In order for older persons to be able to raise their voice in the pandemic situation, the right to the internet as well as the digital technologies has to be guaranteed. This is very important because it could actually result in isolation as well as discrimination. For older persons to be able to raise their voice, the fact that they're able to access the internet in and of itself, and the fact that they're able to utilize the ICT technologies, these services or these accesses actually have to be guaranteed as a fundamental right of older persons. Through this conference, we have looked at the access to digital technologies, to the internet, of the older citizens. The right to life learning education or life-term education for the digital technologies must be fully considered, and I hope that we'll be able to build consensus on this very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marvin, Dongwoo-shi, and Bridget, for sharing your insights and expertise. We are now on our final session where we will focus on the discussions on the two substantive focus areas of the 11th session of the open-ended working group, which are older persons' right to work and access to the labor market, and older persons' access to justice. We have a very exciting lineup of speakers from international organizations, a research institution, and a non-governmental organization. Our first speaker is Dorothea Schmid-Clow. Ms. Schmid is the head of the Department, Management, and Coordination Unit of the Employment Policy Department of the International Labor Organization. She supports the work of the department to promote full and productive employment through developing integrated employment, development, and skills policies. Before her current position, she worked as employment specialist for the ILO in North Africa. Ms. Schmid has published extensively in the area of family economics, poverty reduction, youth employment, aging societies, employment policies, labor market information systems, and labor market indicators. She's one of the core authors of the ILO's Monitor, which analyzes the impact of COVID-19 on the world of work, and co-author of ILO's major publication, Global Employment Policy Review. She holds a PhD in economics from the Albert Ludwigs University in Freiburg, Germany. Our second speaker is Mr. Rio Hada. Mr. Hada is currently coordinating the work of the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in the area of economic and social rights. He also leads the work of OHCHR on the human rights of older persons and serves as the Joint Secretariat with DESA for the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. Since joining OHCHR in 2000, he has worked on a variety of mandates related to the right to development and economic and social rights, including housing, food, education, poverty, and foreign debt. Over the past several years, he led OHCHR's human rights mainstreaming agenda in the UN system and coordinated UN interagency efforts to integrate human rights in policies and programs of the UN development system and to promote human rights-based implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Prior to the OHCHR, he served at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs in New York, the UN Office at Vienna, UNDP, and the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. He holds a Master of International Affairs from Columbia University in New York. Our third speaker is Dr. Che Sung-jae. Dr. Che is currently the Special Advisor at the ASEM Global Aging Center, Professor Emeritus at the Department of Social Welfare, Seoul National University in Korea. UN Representative of the International Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics, and also the President of the Korea Association for Life Planning. Dr. Che has been widely involved in government policy making on aging, served as advisor to the Minister of Health and Welfare, member of the Health and Welfare Policy Development Committee under the Prime Minister, and the Integration Planning Committee for 4 social insurance programs under the Prime Minister, a member of the Committee for Population and Aged Society, and the chairperson of the Social Welfare Policy Review Committee, Seoul Metropolitan Government. He served as a member of the Long-Term Care Policy Planning Committee, Ministry of Health and Welfare, and served as the head of Employment and Welfare Subcommittee of the Transitional Government Committee of the President-elect of the Korean government, and also Senior Secretary to the President of the Korean government in Employment and Welfare Affairs. Our last speaker for this afternoon, but certainly not the least, is Mr. Bill Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell is the principal lawyer at Townsville Community Law and appears for Community Legal Centers Australia in various human rights processes. He has been in practice since 1992 and has a Master of Laws. Mr. Mitchell was awarded the Australian Human Rights Commission Law Award in 2008 for his work in promoting and advancing human rights in Australia through the practice of law. Bill was made an outstanding alumni of the James Cook University in 2012 and was shortlisted for the International Bar Association's Pro Bono Award in 2018. Bill was awarded the Law Council of Australia's President's Medal in 2019 and was also awarded a Medal of the Order of Australia in 2020. That's just very recently. Congrats, Bill. So to begin, I give the floor to Dorothea to discuss the right to work and access to labor market of older persons, to the labor market of older persons. So Dorothea, you have 5 minutes.
Thank
you very much. And I want to start by thanking you for inviting me to this very important event. I want to congratulate you for organizing this event. I found it very, very informative. And I also want to thank you and the audience for listening to an ILO point of view at this point in the discussion. Next slide. We have, okay, thank you. We have analyzed in detail why the current crisis is particularly harmful for certain groups and what actually makes the difference between countries and population groups. I've listed here a whole list of reasons that determine the impact, the economic impact of the crisis, including the level of development, the structure and composition of the economy, unemployment, inactivity and other labor market indicators, labor market institutions, OSH institutions, social protection systems, and the situation, the general situation of disadvantaged groups, and the share of informal economy. All these are determinants on how hard a country or a specific population group is hit. If we now look at all these determinants and we take a specific look on older people, we see that in all these categories, older people have a huge disadvantage. So for example, level of development. The less a country is developed, the less older peoples have rights, and especially rights on labor markets. That's a clear correlation we see. When it comes to the structure and composition, we see that older people usually don't profit from any structural transformation processes in countries, mainly because it's said they cannot reskill and upskill. So they don't profit from what we call modernization or progress. If we look at unemployment and inactivity rates, it's normally the case that if older people leave labor markets, they immediately go into inactivity. They don't go into unemployment. And once you are inactive, it's very difficult to come back. Labor market institutions usually discriminate heavily against older people. They just simply don't take them into account. OSH institutions are there, but because of the fact that older people often need more occupational safety and health institutions, they very often are discriminated from the very beginning. Social protection systems, we've heard that they very often discriminate against older people, especially certain subgroups. The situation overall for disadvantaged groups, age discrimination is one of the heaviest discrimination factors that we find in economic terms. And if we look at the share of informal economy, we see that older people actually make up a huge share in the informal economy, and they make up a very, very especially vulnerable part of the informal economy. So all the determinants that make the crisis worse for certain groups are even worse for older people. Next slide. We do have another factor that makes it very difficult for older people, because we know the hardest hit groups in this crisis are women, youth, older people, persons with disabilities, indigenous people, people in the informal economy. And if you look at older people, they are often a combination of these factors. You're not just an older people, but we have older people who belong to an indigenous group and actually have the only possibility to work in the informal sector. And we see that these factors, if they are multiplied, they lead to even more difficult situations. Next slide. So as I said, older people belong to the hardest hit groups, but what is adding to the problem is that older people's perspective is worse than for other groups for many reasons, and I will mention some of them. Older people have very, very little chances to return to labor markets once they are out. We have analyzed many crises, and it's a fact that once they are inactive or out of the labor force, they just simply don't get a chance to come back. They very quickly give up looking for work because they don't have a chance, and they become discouraged and inactive. Inactive in the economic sense, not that they don't do anything, but inactive in the labor force. because they now, in addition, are a particularly health risky group, they will find it even more difficult than during normal crises. So this is working against them. And because they often do not have a voice, it's very difficult, again, to express their needs and to actually get them heard when it comes to labor market issues. Next slide. I don't have to remind you that, of course, there are other risks that make it very difficult for older people. They carry a higher health risk, and we have heard this very often. And on top of everything, now in this crisis, they face some social risks that are stronger than for other groups, including isolation and the loss of capabilities, which happens to all of us, but it happens especially when you are completely disconnected from labor markets. Next slide. I don't think I have the time to get into the details of the crisis, but you can read our monitors to actually see it. We don't have data specifically for older people. We are working on it, and we will soon come out with some information, global information. But I can tell you that regarding the working hour losses, it's clear that it's been tremendous, 17.3% in the second quarter, 12.1% in the third quarter, and the fourth quarter is not looking better at all. So, and there is, based on what I said, there is no reason to believe that older workers will be less affected. On the contrary. We also see in this crisis, which is a bit unusual, people move immediately into inactivity and not into unemployment, which, as I said, for older people means there is hardly a way to return. Next slide. The labor income losses have been particularly hard in the informal economy. In the first month alone, 60% of the income globally in the informal economy were lost. So this is a huge share, and again, there is no reason to believe that older people are less hard hit, on the contrary. And the resource gap that we face is enormous, and there is a huge risk that even if we have the resources, they will be not linked to older people. Next slide, please. We do have a lot of normative elements to work with, all starting with the right to work, which is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We, from the ILO perspective, have a lot of conventions and recommendations that actually deal with older workers, but often not explicitly. It's just that it mentions non-discrimination, but it doesn't specifically mention older people. An exception is the recommendation 162 for older workers. Please have a look at our Centenary Declaration that we came up with last year. There it explicitly says that we have to take measures that help older workers to expand their choices, optimizing their opportunities to work in good quality, productive and healthy conditions until their retirement, and to enable active aging. This is a document agreed by all our constituents, meaning all our member countries, plus workers and employers. So it's a rich source for knowledge. To conclude, the world will emerge from the pandemic with higher levels of unemployment, inactivity, inequality, poverty, debt, and political frustration, and a terribly bad situation for older workers unless we act now. Immediate, tailor-made support is needed. And here I mean active labor market policies as much as passive labor market policies. We need the combination of both. We need to use this crisis to build back better, especially for older people. And we have to make sure that we use the frameworks that we already have, including the SDGs and the Centenary Declaration on the Future of Work of the ILO. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dorothea. And I now give the floor to Rio to talk about older persons' right to access to justice. Rio, you have the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Karen. It's a pleasure to participate in this conference, and I thank GANRI Working Group on Aging for organizing this. During this difficult time, we need more events and discussions such as this in order to keep the momentum going and prepare for the open-ended working group discussion when it resumes next year. Because of the exigencies created by the pandemic, the preparation of the background paper on access to justice has been delayed. So for today's discussion, I'd like to present the snapshot of that paper that we are currently finalizing, summarizing the various contributions received last year. So first, a brief overview of the current international legal framework concerning access to justice, which is broadly recognized as an essential prerequisite for the realization of all human rights. The concept of the access to justice encompasses the right to a fair trial, including access to and equality before the courts, and just and timely remedies for the violation of human rights. These rights and principles have been firmly established and embodied in the UDHR, International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights, and others. But it was not until the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that explicitly recognized, for the first time, the right to access to justice. All these instruments and others related to access to justice apply equally to all the persons who are entitled to the same procedures and protections in accessing justice the same way as others. But the reality is that none of the international human rights instruments and treaty bodies have specifically addressed the barriers facing all the persons in accessing justice. The UN principles for all the persons provides limited recognition of access to justice in terms of legal and social services in the context of care. At the regional level, access to justice for all the persons is specifically recognized in the two regional instruments, Protocol to African Charter and the Inter-American Conventions. Next slide, please. So it becomes critical that the open-ended working group examines the specific protection gaps and develop its normative elements. As in past years, the chair solicited inputs from all stakeholders in the working group. There are 5 major questions regarding the national legal framework: availability, accessibility, equality and non-discrimination, and accountabilities. Contributions were received from 27 member states and observers, 48 accredited NGOs, 23 A-status NHRIs, and 3 from the UN system and UN special procedures mandate holders. Next slide, please. With regard to national legal framework, most responses refer to the general guarantee provided under the constitutions, although not specific to other persons. Some responses refer to the existence of non-judicial mechanisms such as amicable settlements outside the courts, which have been encouraged. With regard to availability, the question here is whether the judicial or non-judicial mechanisms are available for older persons at local level in urban and rural areas, and responses indicated the existence of courts and legal aid services, including rural areas. Some indicated that existence of community justice centers, legal aid services that older people can avail of, providing alternative dispute settlement mechanisms, and social workers employed in municipal centers also providing help for older persons. Next slide, please. In terms of accessibility, the responses indicated various initiatives on the physical aspects, from making the court building barrier-free to having mobile courts to bring court close to the community in order to diminish the time and money. And some responses indicated the provisions available for guardianship or supported decision-making concerning older persons with disabilities such as dementia. Some responses, though, acknowledge that there's a lack of attention to older persons in the justice system overall, resulting in acceptance of injustice and vulnerability for older persons. Next slide, please. With regard to equality and non-discrimination, the questions here are intended to explore how countries are integrating age perspectives in their justice systems, particularly in terms of raising awareness among the judges and the personnel on the negative impact of ageism. Some countries like Costa Rica and Ecuador have adopted specific law on the right to preferential care for older persons and developed staff awareness raising programs. And some of these laws also have provisions to expedite proceedings if older persons are the subject. In terms of accountability, respondents described oversight mechanisms established, such as ombudspersons, disciplinary court, etc., to ensure the independence and impartiality of judges. Most of those are not specific older persons, however. There are also national human rights institutions or national bodies on older persons to monitor and receive complaints about the violation of the rights, including in the context of the justice system and processes. And next slide, please. The responses have identified a number of challenges facing older persons in access to justice. Most of them identify physical access, as I said, older persons living in rural and remote areas, or in terms of reasonable accommodations. Affordability in terms of poverty and being able to pay for legal services and court fees. And particularly in terms of excessive delays and backlogs in judicial processes, these are the major obstacles identified by respondents. These are also the general challenges regarding the access to justice overall, but it has a special consequences when it comes to older persons. Lack of knowledge and awareness is another challenge, both in terms of older persons who may not know about their rights and how to claim them, and for the judges and staff in the justice system who lack awareness and sensitivities concerning older persons. Digital divide is creating a barrier as applications and documents are increasingly processed electronically. Cultural norms have impacted on older persons, particularly older women's access to justice, with notion of honor and shame associated with resorting to the legal system to resolve disputes, particularly relating to family matters such as property, inheritance, and violence and abuse. Finally, while there may be laws and policies in place, the practical implementation is lacking. Also, the laws and policies themselves can be ageist. The next and the last slide, please. So finally, the respondents provided examples of good practices to address some of these challenges mentioned earlier regarding raising awareness, courts giving priority to older persons to expedite proceedings, provision of free and legal assistance, etc. So in concluding my presentations, I think the submissions indicated that access to justice impacts upon the exercise of all human rights by older persons and vice versa. And access to justice is generally recognized in national laws and policies, but they're not necessarily specific to older persons' needs and situations. So deliberations under the open-ended working group over the next year will be critical to further develop that human rights-based understanding and approaches to access to justice for older persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rio. Let's move on to our reactors, beginning with Dr. Che Song Che. You have 3-4 minutes. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. This is Sungjae Choi, special advisor to ASEM Global Aging Center. I totally agree with Dorothea's addressing of unfavorable conditions in right to work and access to work in labor market in worldwide situation of the COVID pandemic. But I think we need to supplement our argument or advocating all the person's right to work in access to labor market and the right to work. The advocacy could be more effective and convincing, provided with scientific evidences. In most cases that I know, the advocacy efforts are made solely on the ground of ethical or legal compliance without presenting scientific evidence to support the advocacy. I would like to suggest 3 scientific evidences. The first evidence is that productivity is not much related to aging itself. And the second evidence is that some aspect of adult intelligence, especially crystallized intelligence, is improving with aging. And third evidence is that older workers do not take away the jobs of younger workers in the labor market. So far, research studies on productivity and aging are not many. However, the existing studies have shown that productivity in general is not much related to aging itself. So we may need more sophisticated research studies on the relationship between productivity and aging. Regarding adult intelligence, while some intelligence called fluid intelligence that is innate or inherited from parents decline with aging, crystallized intelligence acquired through education, training, and experiences at the birth rises with aging. This means that we can develop jobs utilizing crystallized intelligence of aging workers to make jobs more productive and competitive. Common sense belief is that younger workers cannot enter the labor market without exit of older workers from the market, since the total quantity of jobs in the labor market is fixed. In other words, the labor market is a kind of a zero-sum game. However, this belief has been disproved through many research studies. This is called that as a lump of labor fallacy. Lump of labor fallacy means that older workers do not take away jobs of older workers in the labor market. The second point that I would like to point out is that setting mandatory retirement age may be age discrimination. Some countries have abolished retirement ages, while most countries have kept mandatory retirement age. We need to make it clear that setting mandatory retirement age is discrimination, violating the human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights implicitly prohibits setting retirement age. ILO recommendations also support the abolishment of many mandatory retirement systems. However, in consideration of the reality of social, cultural, economic system of respective countries, particularly in developing countries, retirement age may be gradually raised and finally abolished according to the demographic changes of the respective countries. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Che. Now we move on to Bill. Bill, you have the floor, 3 to 4 minutes.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Can people see that okay? Can people see that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. Look, I'm going to be very quick and I'll run through these slides quickly because of the time we have left. I would like to thank the Chair and also thank GANRI for this opportunity to present on the issue of older persons' access to justice. I think it goes without saying from what Rio has said and reacting to his points that older persons face a very significant justice gap. And in Help Age International's input to the 11th session, they noted that 3/4 of the people they consulted had a justice issue and half of those issues had not been resolved. Justice gap issues include not obtaining justice for everyday matters, excluded from opportunities the law provides, and living in extreme conditions of injustice. Based on the World Justice Project's data, we can say that approximately 126 million older persons are facing a justice gap. So what does access to justice actually mean for older persons? Well, it means an opportunity to actually reinforce the rule of law and to protect them, and that is particularly important where they're vulnerable or they're in a situation of emergency, as they have been during COVID-19. Of course, as Rio noted, it protects and reinforces all of their existing human rights. It will help them enjoy sustainable development, including peace and security. It helps them be recognised and be equal before the law. It asserts their autonomy, their agency, their self-determination and their independence as they age and not, as the last speaker rightly pointed out, just at the time of an age proxy. It also demonstrates and exposes the intersectionality between ageing and other social and political identities that older people have. A broad formulation is needed. We need to recognise that older persons' position within access to justice is characterised by ageism across all aspects, including lower damages in civil litigation, less credible witnesses, less able or impartial jurors, less needy of legal assistance, or a lower priority for law enforcement. So access to justice then must include access to all legal assistance, both traditional and non-traditional institutions. This includes all mechanisms and procedures for protection, redress and remedy. And it must include them in all types of processes, both as seekers, recipients and providers of justice. I'll just maximise that screen, my apologies. I'm not going to go through the barriers because they are legion. Rio highlighted some of these barriers and you can look at the input documents and indeed the document that Rio will release or the Office of the High Commission will release in advance of the 11th session. There are many barriers to accessing justice and NGOs have highlighted many of those barriers. I would like to mention the structural injustice barriers. Older people often face the consequences of societal constructions, not only of ageing or ageism, but also other intersecting issues such as ableism, given that older persons are the largest population cohort with disability. Sexism, older women face greater risks of vulnerability both in economic and in terms of interpersonal violence. Racism, older Indigenous persons face a range of health and life course issues, including post-colonial dispossession, structural disempowerment and entrenched poverty. And paternalism, we know that the removal, denial or ignorance of an older person's autonomy and equality before the law is a significant intersecting issue. So they're facing entrenched ageism within this system, including decision-making, guardianship and safeguarding regimes that in fact erode their self-determination, privacy and autonomy rather than complementing or highlighting. They have anti-discrimination laws that actually forgive common areas of age discrimination. We have detention settings such as prisons and forced treatment facilities that ignore or are completely ill-adjusted to older persons' rights and needs. And we have criminal laws and prosecutorial conduct that downgrade or ignore the inherent value of older persons' lives or indeed their need for protection. On the substantive issues, very little is known about older persons' legal needs. But what is known says that older persons experience a distinct pattern or cluster of legal issues that reflect their complex needs. We know that older persons are less likely to seek resolution of legal issues, and we know that age and disability are the most significant factors in the outcome of legal events. And in fact, older persons and those with disability have the lowest resolution rates. We know that older persons, in fact, also receive the least favourable outcomes to their legal problems. These are very significant issues for access to justice. It means that older persons experience limitations in getting advice, they have the worst rates of resolution, they obtain the least optimal outcomes to their legal issues, and so forth. They are the most likely to benefit from greater levels of assistance to resolve their problems. These exact issues are the sorts of clusters that the Chair's summary to the 7th session identified and has formed the basis of substantive and normative debate so far. We also know that COVID-19 has highlighted the importance of access to justice in the way that it facilitates older persons' access to other rights such as health, free movement, housing and social protections. What are the answers? There are many. Hopefully many will be discussed at the 11th session. They certainly include looking at things through the age-friendly lens and looking at the sorts of domains that we are used to considering in that model. And there are many examples. I give one in Australia where a specialist multidisciplinary model is provided to give access to justice to older Australians that takes account of their needs, as particularly raised in this and the last presentation. I'll leave it there and I thank the Chair.
Thank you very much, Bill. And now we proceed to our open forum, and let's begin from with a question from Ora Sevilla of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines. What are the gaps in the rights to work of older informal workers? And a related question also is, this may also be an opportunity, of course, to discuss these focus areas in relation to COVID-19 pandemic. How has the COVID-19 affected the enjoyment of older persons of these rights? Perhaps Dorothea can answer that particular question, and any other resource person can also answer. And I'll reserve the other two questions for the other two resource persons. So Dorothea, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, thank you very much. As I said, the problem with older workers in the informal economy is that they actually accumulate a lot of disadvantages. They do make quite a big share in the informal economy, and usually they are amongst the poorest of the poor in the informal economy. We do have an ILO recommendation, which is actually very new, which is recommendation 204 concerning the transition to formality. And there explicitly older workers are mentioned as one of the most disadvantaged groups within the informal economy. So if you put together the fact that older people don't have the same right to work in reality compared to others, and that the same is the truth for workers in the informal economy who obviously lack a whole set of basic workers' rights, you can imagine the legal situation of older people in the informal economy. Regarding the COVID situation, as I mentioned, there is not a single factor that actually plays in favor of older people. And different to other crises, it's going to be extremely difficult because on top of not being able to return to labor markets, even under normal crisis circumstances, we have the issue now that there's additional discrimination against older people because they are considered to be a higher health risk group. So this is going to make it even more difficult for them to have any chance to go back to labor markets. And this, in situations where you have a social protection system in place, might not be so much of an issue. But we also have to take into consideration that with the current debt levels that countries have, there is a high risk that the right to pensions is not going to be livable because there is simply no resources anymore. So we really have to take into account all these issues And I truly think that from a labor market perspective, the situation for older people is worse than ever before.
Thank you very much for that response, Dorothea. Perhaps we now move to the last question of the afternoon from Chi Eun-hee, Executive Director of the ASEM Global Aging Center. What do you think is the biggest reason for the delay in the realization of the UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, despite ongoing discussions on the draft of a convention? When can we see much progress in the drafting? If we make little progress in the current pandemic situation, when the lives of older persons are neglected or ignored, and discrimination and abuse of older persons is spreading rapidly. Perhaps we can invite Dr. Che to respond to the previous question if you want, and also to this current question. Dr. Che, you have the floor.
Yes, I think it's in this situation. I have participated in the open-ended working group on aging for the past 10 years, and recently, and many sessions have very specific on the right of the older persons in concrete item of the right of the older person. But the most of the advanced countries economically and against the new convention on the older persons, right of the older person, but others, developing countries and also many NGOs in developing countries, also in advanced countries, the favorable for the need of the EU Convention on the right of the older person. But I think it will take too much time to have that international convention on the right of the older person. But in the meantime, as I discussed previously, and we need to provide two strategies. One is to emphasis on legal, on ethical basis, and the other one is we have to convince the government people and the employer in private sectors with some scientific evidences and more age disaggregated statistical data that show that what percentage of how many people are discriminated in labor market and how they can improve their workability in the labor market. Without that kind of statistical, factual data and scientific evidence, it is our advocacy or our argument for the right of the older person may have a very limited, impact in promoting the right of the older person worldwide.
Thank you, Dr. Che. And any responses from Rio and Bill? Would you like to just raise your hand if you... Yes, Bill.
I would like to respond to the issue of the convention issue. I think we're on the record, our organisation, as supporting a convention on the rights of older persons. And I think that what we're going through and what we've been through for the last 12 months is perhaps the strongest evidence that we could ever see for the need for greater human rights protections for older persons. We've seen that soft law like MIPA and the UN principles have not protected older persons from the most grievous human rights breaches, including those that led to their deaths. So I think we have a very strong evidence base for the last 12 months, and it's time that we spent the next session cataloguing exactly where those violations were, and I think we'll see they fit neatly with the clusters identified by the Open-Ended Working Group since its first session.
Thanks, Bill. Rio, any last words?
Yes, very quickly, I echo the points made by Bill and Mr. Sanjay Choi. about the need for more data and evidence to make a stronger case and create a better understanding of the specific needs and protection gaps of the older persons. OSHR is updating the study on the protection gap that was done in 2012, and we are hoping to present that study, updated study, to the open-ended working group in March. And second, the point that Bill made before about structural injustice and barriers, including on ageism, I think that's also an underlying cause of not having a faster progress and getting more attention to the work of the open-ended working group. And it actually gives a stronger argument to have a convention that provides a more comprehensive framework to address issues such as access to justice rather than a very piecemeal approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, thank you, Dorothea, Rio, Songdeshi, and Bill for sharing your insights and thoughts on the matter. You know, it has been a very long afternoon, morning, or evening to some of you, but it was indeed a very fruitful discussion, having been able to cover not only the focus areas for the 11th session of the open-ended working group in relation to the development of a convention on the rights of older persons and in the context of the global pandemic. It has framed our expectations for the 11th session of the OEWGA. So let me just, in summary, let me just make some, share with you some of the notes that we have made here. Speakers made compelling arguments for a new convention on the rights of older persons. Lifelong learning, for one, is not covered in any of the legal instruments. The social protection of older persons, particularly the marginalized sectors, have been inadequate and inaccessible despite existing instruments. The COVID-19 pandemic has even shown how some older persons are particularly vulnerable in terms of their income or of their income resources. As for access to justice, we have just heard that none of the international instruments acknowledge the nuances in accessing justice mechanisms in older age. We've heard also from the chair-elect of the open-ended working group on aging, among others, how the pandemic has given a new urgency to the task of strengthening the legal framework to better protect the rights of older persons, which is the core of the work of the open-ended working group. It has been emphasized that all of us here, NHRIs, governments, NGOs, international organizations, the academe and the private sector cannot afford to neglect our duty, especially in the present context. And the need, of course, the necessity to be able to identify the gaps, to acknowledge the divides. We must be able to present evidence to show that clearly the situation of older persons needs a stronger legal framework for us to move on. On behalf of the organizers and the participants, I would like to thank all the resource persons who have shared their time, their expertise, and insights with all of us. Of course, we are very grateful for your participation in this conference. To all participants, we hope that you have taken something of value from this conference and use it to further all our work for the protection and promotion of the human rights of older persons. Thank you very much. There is still so much to do, as we all know, but we will never tire of working until all older persons around the world of this generation and the next, and even the next, are able to fully enjoy their human rights. And we hope to see you all in the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. Maraming salamat from the organizers. Let me just mention them once again. The organizers, the Department of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Rights or Social Affairs, UNDESA, the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, of course, the Permanent Mission of the Argentine Republic, the OHCHR, or the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and of course our main sponsor, main organizer, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea. From the Philippines, maraming salamat po. Domo kamsahamnida, and thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, good evening, or good morning.
Bye.
Bye.